given that this is not an active coal mine but was previously denied, and given that the NDP have fought to protect the Eastern Slopes from coal mining in 2021 and 2022 with the Eastern Slopes Protection Act, a bill that received widespread endorsement from environmental groups, agricultural producers, and municipal councillors, and given that both times the UCP blocked this bill from debate, and given that the drilling of North Back is exploring would be illegal had that legislation been passed. Why is it that this government has ignored the guidance of industry leaders? Do they not value the opinion of experts? It's a little bit of deja vu because I'm pretty sure that's the same answer I heard yesterday, which is basically a non-answer. The Eastern Slopes Protection Act would have made this mining exploration illegal, but instead we have a ministerial order that places the decision in the energy minister's hands. I asked him yesterday and I heard nothing again today. The Premier and the Minister don't need to wait for the AER. They can tell Albertans right now that they will not let this coal mining go forward. My question for the Premier, mountains or mines, Premier?
Hear, hear.
Albertans don't want new coal mines on the Eastern Slopes. Indigenous and municipal leaders, environmentalists, ranchers, and folks who value these distinctly Albertan natural landscapes joined together in 2020 to say no to coal. But the UCP didn't listen to Albertans, and they refused to pass or even debate the Eastern Slopes Protection Act. Now the same Australian mining company is back with new application to drill dozens of new exploratory holes on Grassy Mountain. Will the Premier finally listen to regular Albertans, pass the Eastern Slopes Protection Act, and say no to coal mines? Well, given that the town of Canmore is in the midst of a significant housing crisis and businesses struggle to attract or retain workers because of a lack of housing, and given that young people frequently live in their vehicles because they can't find an affordable place to live, and given that this government has done nothing to build much needed housing, and given that this development also does nothing to address the housing crisis in a meaningful way, can the minister explain to the residents of Canmore how the province can allow a development like this to proceed when it doesn't even address the residents' primary concerns?
But the primary question that I get asked by my constituents is why? Why are we doing this? Why are we exploring this ridiculous idea of taking something that's working and creating something that we don't know if it will work? If we have the certainty of a Canada pension plan, why do we want to fix something that's not broken? I'm only saying this because I'm conveying to you and to all members of this House through you, Mr. Speaker, what I am hearing from my constituents. This is what people are telling me when I'm walking down the street.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Minister of Energy suggested I Google where Grassy Mountain Mine is on the Eastern Slopes, and so I did. I'd like to table the requisite copies of maps that I pulled from the Alberta government website. One is of the Eastern Slopes boundary, one is from the Eastern Slopes policy, and another is from the Alberta Wilderness Association detailing the location of the mine. Thank you. On the Eastern Slopes. There are no other sources of water for southern Alberta. How we manage the Eastern Slopes matters. Our government seems to have forgotten that. Rather than conserving water, they are allowing applications for coal mining exploration. This will not only pollute this precious water, but use much of it, making less available for cows, fish, and people. Rather than protecting the intact forests and the headwaters, the government supports logging these sensitive ecosystems. Logging practices on the Eastern Slopes could be designed to protect our communities from wildfire, drought, and flood, but it isn't planned that way. Rather than implementing sustainable multi-use recreation plans for Albertans, the government fails to adequately manage motorized recreation that continues to wreak havoc on wetlands and wildlife habitat. Collaborative planning with diverse user groups could address these impacts, but the government refuses to implement the recommendations stemming from those groups. We could pass the Eastern Slopes Protection Act. We could work with communities, First Nations, and forestry companies to enable sustainable forestry management practices, and we could create better trail management plans. Because at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, climate change doesn't care if we're ready. It's already here. And if we don't act now, we will foreclose on the options to ensure the water on the Eastern Slopes continues to flow. Nobody has said to me they really wish that the president of a board or a commission was making more money. Rather, what my constituents are sharing with me is that they wish that they were making more money or that they were spending a little less of it. Utilities are too high, I hear. Rent is too high. Housing is unaffordable. It's expensive to drive a car because gas is so expensive. And what this bill does is it just makes the rich richer. So while Albertans in Banff-Kananaskis are struggling to pay rent and buy food, this government wants us to spend time talking about paying some of the highest paid executives in Alberta need to be paid a little bit more. What a waste of time. It's really unfortunate to me because it's just another example of how this government is not actually focused on the priorities of the Albertans that we have all been elected to represent in this House. And that is why we are calling this bill the Gravy Train Part 1, because it really is just about creating a UCP gravy train for the rich to get richer. Choo-choo. Well, given that some of this logging overlaps an internationally recognized and popular trail network in West Bragg Creek, and given that the government granted local trail organizations hundreds of thousands of dollars from the Kananaskis Conservation Pass to build and maintain this network, and given that the local community invested thousands of volunteer hours to do so, will the minister admit that this whole fiasco is created by his promising the same trees to forestry and tourism? Does the right hand even know what the left is doing? This year, Alberta and Canada experienced their worst wildfire seasons. It's horrifying for communities. While the members opposite like to downplay the role of climate change and blame an epidemic of arsonists for this, we prefer to base our policy recommendations on facts. Fact, climate change is making our forests drier. It's late November and Banff is under a fire advisory. Fact, climate change is altering precipitation patterns across Alberta. Fact, a drier soil throughout the year leads to increased fire risk in the spring, summer, and fall. It's not a matter of if a devastating wildfire hits Banff-Kananaskis, it's a matter of when.